Nice. Let's see. Okay, is it showing my screen?
Yes. Yep. We can see your screen now.
Perfect. Okay. So hey everyone. I'm Beltran. I'm a graduate from Queen Mary from last year, 2020. And I just started my PhD at Imperial. I don't have a master's, so that's one of the things that I wanted to sort of start discussing later. And yeah, because basically I'm technically doing my master's year, but as a PhD student. So it's been quite interesting, considering that this past year I've been pretty much completely from my room. So in terms of PhD experience, I'm not really going to speak that much about it. I'll let that to the other two speakers, and I'm sure they've got much more to add than I do. But instead, I thought I would focus on more sort of the transition between undergrad and postgrad, and sort of what things drew me towards postgrad and what I did in my undergrad that I think impacted a lot more than I think usually gives credit to. So for the talk today, I'll just be giving a bit of a background. I'll then mention, this is like the key topic, right? If there's anything that you should get out of my talk today, it's if PhD is something you're interested in, then what things which are not strictly sort of the curriculum can you do to make sure that you maximize your chances? And then I'll give, this is sort of an open discussion as well, a small talk on whether PhDs, are they outdated, undervalued, and then CDTs and DTPs. And then I'll give a brief description about what my project is, and what I've been up to so far, what I'm currently doing, and sort of what I've got planned. So my background is, as I mentioned before, I graduated from, I joined Queen Mary in 2017. I then did a summer internship at the National Physical Laboratory, it's also called NPL. It's in Teddington, Southwest London, on my second year. I then graduated as a theoretical physics student last year. And then I'm currently based between Imperial and NPL, doing climate physics. And so the reason why I call it the tick boxes is because this is generally the big overview that you get out of people. But in reality, I think it's very misleading in terms of what actually happened during my undergrad and what got me the PhD. And so this slide, I think, gives it a better perspective at the very least. The main thing is that throughout my undergrad, there were a lot of things going on that weren't academically related, which I think if it wasn't for these things, I wouldn't have done as well as it did. And it definitely played a massive role. So I joined Queen Mary through clearing. Actually, I had to sort of, at the time, speak with the admissions officer and kind of convince him that I could do physics. Let's put it that way. And so I got into clearing, and I really wanted to be quite involved in physics. And so I became a physics ambassador for the 3 years that I was a student, and I absolutely loved it. If you've got any doubts about being a physics ambassador, let me know. I particularly enjoyed the working in schools with GCSE students. Then in my second year, I was social secretary for SciStar. So I'm repping the hoodie right now. I'm very happy to be back and seeing some familiar names. And then in my third year, I was the IOP campus ambassador. And this is sort of when COVID struck. So there were a lot of things happening. And then the last thing, which I'll get back to, is the research public impact internship. I think that's probably the one thing that I really take from Queen Mary. And I forgot to add, but I ended up graduating top of my class, which I didn't expect. considering I came into clearing, it was not something I was looking for. And I don't think I did anything particularly special about it either. And I really want you to realize that doing well academically is, to a large extent, not really related to your academics. It might sound contradicting, but I'm going to put the next slide and go through what it is. Yeah, so the next slide is a bit of an overview of my past 3 years. And what I mean by the power of being involved, it might sound very cliche, but throughout these 3 years, I was a physics ambassador. Granted, in my third year, I didn't work as much. I didn't do as many open days and whatnot. But my first year was more of a sort of find out what uni is like. So as you can see, the spread in my results is kind of all over the place. You know, I was starting to be an ambassador, getting settled. And what's really interesting, and this is why I've got thermodynamics put, is if you look at my second year, I don't know if you can see my mouse.
Yes, we can, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So interestingly enough, in my second year is when I realized, like, oh, wow, you know, my first year went well. I was really enjoying being an ambassador. And in my second year, I decided to then join the Physics Society. And funnily enough, I told myself, can I make my life as busy as possible without, of course, overdoing? But interestingly enough, the busier I made, or the more involved I got in what I did, the better the results I got, which is a bit counterintuitive. And the reason why I want to draw attention is because in second year, there was one module, thermodynamics, which I didn't find the most exciting. And I decided to not really go to class that much. And in terms of results, it's this one. So yeah, I would say, you know, if you can, kind of go to class. But you know, when you're in class, like at the end of the day, you brought yourself there. I know that right now it's complicated with you know, the current situation of being involved, but if anything, I really want you to sort of you know, take that. At the end of the day, you chose to do physics, and I do believe that we all truly have a passion for it. And it really, like, the more involved that you become with your passion, the more fulfillment you get out of it. And that directly relates to how well you're going to do with it. And another part of it is really be well surrounded. Without a doubt, let's say, like, the highlights of my undergrad have been being very well surrounded and having the support. So when that meant study for exam revision, is make sure that, you know, you take your breaks. You know, is don't overdo it. I never studied the day before the exam. I never saw the point in really doing last minute readings. And for example, during exam season, you know, after the exam, go out with your friends, go to the pub. You know, enjoy what you're doing for the sake of doing it well, and getting fulfillment out of doing it. And when I was in my second year, I was starting to consider the options of postgrad, and you know, I knew for sure I wanted to do a master's or two. So at that point, I was having a conversation with Freeney, who's one of the PhD students, and Joe knows her. And she told me about these programs that she was doing and how there were different types of PhDs. And so I'll get more into that later. But I think it's very important, you know, get involved if you can in SciStar. It helps a lot. I cannot stress how much fun I've had being part of SciStar Physics Ambassador. Have a hobby that you stick to. In my case, it was rock climbing, and it was something that I would do in the evenings. And really, you know, I think there's a great power in routine. You know, because at the end of the day, if every day you're used to something, when either something great happens or something not that great happens, it's much easier to forget about those. So having a routine is extremely valuable. For me, it was rock climbing. It was what gave me my routine after classes. And then I started rock climbing in the morning, which I'm dying to get back to. Because right now, trying to get a routine from home, it's not the easiest, I would say. And then the last thing is gratitude. So when I was writing my my applications, my two referees were Dr. Mesquita, who was my advisor, and I can recommend wholeheartedly, as well as his modules. And then the other one was Dr. Phillips. And I'll speak more through how I got the PhD offer. But after I did, I did reach out to him. I had taken one of his modules before and did well computing, so I'm very keen on coding. And I reached out to him and said, hey, you know, the past few months you've helped me a lot. He was extremely responsive to whenever I needed to get something submitted, he would do it right away. And I got in touch with him to see if there was anything I could do to thank him. And funnily enough, we kept in touch. He told me there's a few things that he's got in mind and I could help out. And I ended up working with him and Dr. White on measuring the impact that the research that the physics department at QMUL does in social media. And it's currently in preprint. So you can find it. And you know, it really goes a long way to be involved and to acknowledge that there's a lot of, like, people at the end of the day want the best for you as long as you're willing to show commitment and be involved in it. And I cannot thank Dr. Phillips enough for all the help he gave me. And in the end, I really look forward to, at some point in the future, working again with him. So, you know, it's quite broad because, you know, I was doing engagement with as a physics ambassador and then measured engagement through or working with Dr. Phillips, who wrote my references. So in the end, it all links together. And, you know, me being a PhD student, sure, the academic part is the first thing I would say that they look, but in a tangible manner, it really wasn't what I would say made me achieve that. So now I'll speak a bit more about the PhDs. As a sort of poll, I wonder who knows what a CDT and a DTP is? If you do, yeah, raise of hands, nice. Okay. Okay. So I assume, so this is one of the things when I was speaking with Freedy, she's a PhD student at Queen Mary, and she mentioned that there's these new types of PhDs, which are usually based around interdisciplinary research, and they have a different structure in the sense that they are usually 1 + 3 years, and in the first year you do a master's in research, and then the next 3 years you do the research sort of thing. And so I found that quite interesting. And, you know, I was looking at a variety of them, and I ended up considering quite a few. Now, this is, I'll make a big disclaimer. My application process was, I would say, pretty unconventional in the sense that it was a direct result of my internship at MPL. During the internship, I saw it as a big chance to make it something more. And so through my supervisor at the internship, one of his colleagues had a project that I found very interesting that was currently awaiting funding. And in the end, it went through. And because it was sort of through speaking, my application process was a lot of informal but in-person chats. So it was quite long. I think the first once the funding got confirmed, I think that was in October. Then in November we had the first chat, and then it wasn't until I would say February that we had the formal interview. So we had about 4 meetings where we discussed the project. We discussed sort of what I wanted from it, where I was going academically, what it was very tied down to the internship, which funnily enough, it wasn't really that related to the project. And let's say in the end, it ended up going sort of through the back door, so that by the point that I got to the formal interview, it was technically the formal interview on paper, but at that point we had spoken about the project so much that it was, let's say, just for the records. So if you're interested in something and you're considering an option, I would say try to make sure that your internship is aligned with it, and select an internship based on the possibilities it might give you. So I was aware that NPL, they host industrial case projects. So that's when an industry partners with an institution, and they can do like funding from both sides and support a project. So that's where my project is. So my project is an iCase Imperial and NPL, and my supervisor at Imperial is Dr. Helen Brindley, and she is the director of the Grantham Institute, which is a research center between LSE and Imperial that revolves around climate and policy. And because of that, I'm aligned with the Science and Solutions for a Changing Planet, DTP. So there's about, I would say, like, there's a lot of new physics students, but there's also biology, chemists, there's also people on the, more life sciences. And it's really interesting, actually. It gives, I think, PhD life a bit of a different perspective that I didn't want the whole, sort of being quite alone in what I did. I wanted to see more broadly what the research that I was doing was going to impact. So if at any point you have any doubts, I'm happy to stay back afterwards to discuss this further. And then in the end, my project is called The Prospect of a Complete Spectrally Resolved Earth Radiation Budget Dataset. And the key is from the interoperation of new Earth observation missions. So the Earth radiation budget is basically the energy that comes from the sun at the top of the atmosphere, the balance versus what the Earth radiates. And what's interesting is that this happens on 2 different regimes. So the first one is the shortwave or reflected. Sometimes you hear it. And then the other one is the long wave, which is what the Earth emits. And there's a new generation of satellites that are being launched, and they're all being planned at the moment and anticipated for working simultaneously. So these new satellites are Truths, which is the one that NPL is involved, and I'm heavily involved at the moment. So that's measuring in the shortwave. And what's really interesting is that because these 2 energy fields, if you will, happen on different regimes, there's only a few things that happen in all of it. But the benefit is that you can have things that are ambiguous in one that you can use the other to resolve. The other 2 satellites, I'm conscious of time and I don't want to go over time. I'm happy to stay chatting afterwards. The other 2 satellites are EASI Next Generation and FORM, which is going to be measuring the far infrared for the first time. And the key point about Truth is its radiometric accuracy. And what's really cool is that you can relate the radiometric accuracy, which is how well you're measuring radiance, which is, let's say, the amount of light that you're measuring. You can relate it to how long it's going to take you to detect a trend. So your calibration requirements is going to dictate, if you do a fit for a trend line, how much uncertainty you've got in that trend. And the size of that uncertainty is going to dictate how long you're going to have, or like how long you need to measure it. Another benefit of having really, really highly accurate sensors is climate models have a lot of uncertainty, particularly around feedbacks and clouds. And clouds happen in both regimes, so that's quite nice. They're a bit of a mess, but they're also being used to constrain climate models. And currently my work is rated more towards the simulation, given that these satellites haven't launched. So to simulate how light propagates through the atmosphere, you use a set of tools called radiative transfer codes. There's a whole suite of them, which is quite interesting, particularly if you enjoy the numerical side and the data side. I think this is a field that you could definitely find quite interesting. And then the other one is orbit simulation. So there's ORCID, and then there's ESA software that we're using as being an ESA mission. And at the moment, what I'm doing is we have quite a large data set, and we're seeing how the different orbit parameters or orbit types, because there's all these different types of orbits, and we're seeing how much of the information on natural variability can you retain from different orbits of sampling, and inherently how much more time are you going to need if you choose a different type of orbit. So there's a lot of cool stuff that I'm happy to chat one-on-one if you're interested in Earth observation and climate monitoring. But you know, that's sort of on the side. The key takeaway is, you know, get in touch. I'm really happy for people to ask me about getting involved in your studies, any tips, anything that might help you, you know, sort of do well. I'm very keen. So please reach out. It's only been a year since I finished my undergrad, and I still very much feel like an undergrad. So yeah, I hope this was helpful. I hope you're looking forward to being involved a bit more once restrictions lift up a bit. And yeah, get in touch. Yeah, I'll let the other two speakers now speak more about research. But yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. We'll quickly move on to the next speaker, but before we go, I just thought I'd ask you, since today is the deadline to submit SEPNet for SEPNet applications, how was your SEPNet internship that you held when you were an undergrad?
Very good. Very good. I can really recommend NPL. I applied, I only did 5 applications. I think it's best to generally apply for the ones you care and you're willing to invest the time. I got invited for 4. And NPL, if you have a chance, they've got a whole range of, they've got from like quantum to plastics to measurement to optical. They've got a lot, and I can really recommend them. They were extremely supportive, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you very much. They'll probably, I'm sure there'll be a more broad question and answer session after the talks, but we want to, just in case anyone has to leave early, we want to get right through it. So thank you very much, Beltran. I'm now going to suggest that Sebastian goes second. Apologies for my mic not working earlier. Just to introduce Sebastian. Sebastian is a PhD student in EECS, Electronic Engineering Computer Science, and as far as I'm aware, he studies music engineering and human-computer interaction. So I'll let him introduce himself otherwise, because I'll do a terrible job, and he's very capable. Right. Off you go, Sebastian.
Do you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Right. Okay, that's perfect. Because I never actually shared my screen in Microsoft Teams because I never use it.
Oh, so we would prefer to use Zoom, but until recently, the SU made you pay for Zoom.
So just give me 1 second, because I just updated my system to Big Sur and it asked me a whole bunch of stuff now. So sorry, yeah.
It's okay. If you need to share content, you go to the top of the page, next to where it says leave, you click on share content, and then.
Yeah, I got it. I just had to restart Microsoft Teams because
Yeah.
Mac gave me a hard time.
I had to fully restart my computer because my mic and all sound wasn't working. So Teams is a perfect software with no exploits. There we go. Right.
So you should see my slides now, I hope.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, thanks for inviting me. I'm not a physics student. I know Luke because he took a module that I demonstrated for. So this is where the connection comes from, which is actually sound. What is it, Luke? Sound recording production techniques. I should really know the modules that I'm teaching, but they have long names. Anyways, this is the things that I want to talk about, but it's actually quite a lot of stuff. So I just kind of go over them quickly, and if there's anything that people are interested in, we can talk about it more in depth in the Q&A section. So I'm actually in an interdisciplinary PhD program, so I want to talk a little bit about what interdisciplinary research really is and why it's useful and interesting. So interdisciplinary research is not something that is really strictly defined, and you come across other words like cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary, I hate this word, interdisciplinary, and so on. Very often they mean exactly the same thing, sometimes they mean different things, but yeah, it's one of these words that are not clearly defined. You can go to UK Research and Innovations, and they provide some really good resources. UKRI, in general, that's the body that funds a lot of the research that people do, and also fund my research. So it's actually also a good resource to learn about PhD programs if you're interested. So interdisciplinary research is not something that is new by no means, actually. If you think about it historically, education was a lot more holistic and less compartmentalized than it is in today's world. And I mean, a very obvious example is from the Renaissance, if you look at Leonardo da Vinci. So why is it important? So this is maybe my opinion on an example that I just picked because I found it was interesting. If you think about real world problems, you find very often that they're very complex. You can't solve them with like just one specific approach. And since you all study physics, you know that you use a lot of models that work for the specific thing that you're trying to solve, but you might abstract a body to say it's a perfect sphere or something like this, and then you might run into a problem if you actually apply this to a grand scheme real world problem. And the reason I chose these buildings here is if you think about how a successful housing project would work, you obviously need architects at first to make the design, but then you need engineers to make it work so that the buildings don't collapse. And then you might need urban planners or even sociologists to integrate these building blocks into the existing community or make it a place that people actually want to live in. And if you don't have people from different disciplines, you will end up with either a house that collapses, or you will end up with a house that no one wants to live in, or a house that's really ugly. So only when all these people come together, you actually make something that is successful in the real world. So something that is kind of the latest fad, maybe not the very latest, but it's been talked about a lot recently, is going from STEM to STEAM. So I think you all know STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and you add the arts in there. Can I just check, because it says here speaker volume low, if you can all hear me?
We can hear you perfectly.
Okay.
For me, yeah.
Okay, great. So, and this is actually a good segue to the PhD program that I am in, which is short the MET-CDT, and that stands for the EPSRC and AHRC Center for Doctoral Training in Media and Arts Technology. which is quite a mouthful. So luckily, wasn't Beltran, sorry if I butcher your name, already introduced what CDTs are, and I am in one. So the CDT that I'm in, or maybe I should quickly go over EPSRC and AHRC. I hate these acronyms. If you look at the bottom of the slides, you actually see what they mean, what they stand for. So it's the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council and the Art and Humanities Research Council. The UKRI is made out of, I'm not sure right now, 5 research councils that all target different disciplines, and sometimes they actually work together, as for my CDT. So what we do at the Media and Arts Technology Center is interdisciplinary research, yes, at the intersection between academic research, digital technologies, and creative industries. It was established in 2009, and so far we graduated 60 PhD students. It's part of EECS, as Luke already said, and the PhD students are kind of spread across the research groups in EECS. For example, C40M, which is the Center for Digital Music, COGSCI, which stands for Cognitive Sciences, and Antennas, which is robotics. So these research centers all usually also offer, like, say, non-CDT places for PhD. So if you're thinking about doing a PhD, it might be worth checking out the different research groups that we have at Queen Mary. And something that is so obviously what we do, the usual PhD or research stuff, like doing research, writing papers, presenting them at conferences. But we also do a lot of more public-facing events, like going to Ars Electronica. I'm not sure if anyone knows Ars Electronica. It's actually or arguably the largest media arts festival in the world. And we went there 3 times now. Last year it was online, but before that we actually went to Linz and exhibited, which was really cool. And it's in a way a lot more refreshing than always being with other academics, because like having to explain to normal people, or like people who are not involved in your research, why your research matters or why it's interesting, can be quite a challenge and can really make you think about things in a new way and put things into perspective. So I can actually encourage everyone to just talk to people who are not in your bubble, because sometimes it makes things very obvious that are maybe wrong with your research or that are wrong with the way that you look at things. But okay, I digress. Let me go through a few projects that I think highlight interdisciplinary research quite well. So these are all current math students. The first one by Antonella is, she's looking into e-textiles and autistic children. So e-textiles are electronic textiles, which basically means having an electronic circuit built in to textile that you can have it in clothes, you can have it in anything that uses fabric. And she built this really great instrument that can help autistic children to basically come out of their shell and communicate. And on the one hand, you obviously need to build this whole thing. You have microcontrollers in it to read the sound. You have to weave in the conductive thread and so on. But then you also need to know about what autism means in a social context, how to deal or how to address these issues from a more sociological or psychological perspective. The second project is by Leah, who's also quite a successful musician, and she is really interested in building very large-scale instruments and see how people engage with them and how they use their body to make music. But before she can do any sort of study, she has to actually build this instrument. And so there's crafting involved or instrument building involved, but also digital signal processing. And she uses this microcontroller, Bella, which is actually used to be a research project at Center for Digital Music and is now a commercial product. It's based on Raspberry Pi, and it's like a tiny microcontroller that you can use, microcomputer that you can use to make all sorts of cool music applications. So if that's something you might be interested in, you should definitely check them out because they're pretty cool. So Unsocial VR, that's by Tom Gurian. It's about virtual reality and human interaction. There's actually quite a bit of virtual reality research at Met or at Queen Mary in general. What Tom looked in to specifically was how you could fake attention in a virtual environment. So he looked at how people engage with each other and what kind of hand gestures they use. And then you were in a study looking at other people who are in this virtual room, and some of them actually don't have their real hand gestures transferred, but have them generated. And you had to guess which ones are the real ones and which ones are the fake ones. I hope that makes sense. I thought it was really, really interesting because, again, on the one hand, you need to program this whole environment. You need to actually generate convincing hand gestures, which is, you need quite a bit of technical skill for that. But then on the other hand, you need to know how humans actually interact and what is natural and how humans communicate with each other. And that sounds maybe trivial at first, but once you get a little bit into this topic, you realize that a lot of the things that you do naturally, you're completely unaware of, but you know when something's off. So it's a really, really difficult and interesting topic. The last one is my research, which I have some slides about this later on. Talk a little bit about how I got into the PhD program. And actually my road to a PhD was very, very different from, was it Beltran? So I'm really sorry if I remembered your name wrong. So my road was a lot less streamlined. I started with electrical engineering and in Munich in Germany, and I actually hated it and I was really bad at it. I was kind of at the edge of failing most of the time, to be honest, because I actually spent most of my time, more or less all of my time, on making music, playing in bands, going on tour, and doing all sort of music related stuff. And at this point, I couldn't really see how this would connect to electrical engineering, which is quite obvious for me now. But yeah, I guess you grow older and wiser at some point. Anyways, I didn't finish my engineering undergrad and went to University of West London for my last year and actually finished a degree in music technology, which was a lot more suitable for me at the time. And actually, I was really interested in sonic arts or sound art, or like a more artistic practice at this point. And what better university to go to than Goldsmiths? I guess maybe for physics, Goldsmiths is not such a household name, but I mean, if you're in any way interested in some really artistic or kind of out of the box projects, I also have a really good department in psychology. It's definitely a university to check out there. They do really interesting and crazy stuff there. A lot of creative coding going on there as well. Anyways, I went there and studied sonic arts, a master of music. And I really went there to do sound art, but most of the time I spent coding and creating interactive systems, and really realized that this is something that I am good at and I really enjoy doing. So before going to my PhD, I just worked as a sound designer and electronics developer. And this is not a joke. Yes, I worked for the world's largest manufacturer of model trains, which is an actual real job that pays like real money. That's a question one of my friends asked me, wait, is this a real job that pays real money? And it paid surprisingly well. Maybe I should never have quit. Anyways, I didn't like it very much there. Ultimately, it was quite boring to just do the same job over and over again. So I applied for a PhD, and if you're interested how I got in there, we can talk about this more in a bit. Let me just check how much time. Oh yeah, we're good at time. Let me talk a little bit about the research I do. Maybe I won't talk about it too much because I'm not sure how relevant this is for anyone, but I just go over. I hope you can still, can you see a web page now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So this is my research topic. If that doesn't make any sense to you, that's normal. It doesn't make the most sense to most people. But if you ever done any sort of music production or looked at a synthesizer, you might realize that they're really complicated, and it's actually not very easy to generate a sound in a straightforward way. Like, you might have an idea, you can like, you have it in your head, but then actually transferring this into a real sound is quite difficult. And I'm not talking about going to a piano and playing a note. I'm talking about creating a sound with a synthesizer. So what we talk about here is musical timbre. Musical timbre means how a sound sounds. So imagine you play a C on a piano and a C on a violin. They will sound different, right? And or you play a C on an electric guitar or on a distorted electric guitar, they will all sound different, even though they have the same pitch and probably even the same volume. And what makes them different is musical timbre. At least that's one simplified definition of musical timbre. And I always thought, yeah, you know, the tools that we have, they are quite engineering. You have a lot of knobs, a lot of slides. You need to know quite a bit about digital signal processing to really use them effectively. And it's not really fun, and it's not really that expressive. So there's a lot of research going on how this can be improved. And there's been also a lot of research that shows how humans associate sounds with other things, which is called cross-modal associations. And one of these cross-modal associations is between sounds or musical timbre and shapes. You can hear like a violin has quite a nice round sound. I mean, this is not a violin, it's more of a cello, but yeah, it has more of a round sound, and a drum set, especially the cymbals, would have more of like a bright, very sharp sound, and which would be represented by sharp edges. And there's a lot of research that kind of proves this concept. And I thought, well, if this is true, and it seems to be true, could we build a synthesizer where you draw something, you have some sort of system that extracts information from these sketches and maps them towards the parameters of the synthesizer. So you draw something that you feel like, I think we all have an idea about how the spiral would sound like and how the sharp, wiggly, weird thing would look like. So you have this idea, you draw it, and then the sound comes out automatically, which in my opinion would be a lot more intuitive than moving a lot of sliders at the same time. Yeah, if you're interested in that, you can just drop me an email or look at my GitHub repository, which is super unorganized, but might be more organized in future. So I won't bore you with the details of my research, but I maybe talk a little bit about the kind of things that I do, and I think something that is very typical for interdisciplinary research. So on the one hand, I first need to confirm that, well, find out how people actually draw stuff. So I do a lot of participant studies that are modeled after existing studies, have to invite participants, recruit them, set everything up. So actually read a lot of papers from cognitive sciences and psychology. But then to actually build a system that works, you need the technical skills to extract quantitative measurements from your data. So I do a bit of computer vision and music information retrieval. And because everything is machine learning now, I do some machine learning as well, in particular variational autoencoders to find mappings between the drawings and the sounds. And then ultimately, this should be a project that could actually be used by someone. So I have to think about how do humans actually want to use this. So I have to think about building a usable, or ideally a really good, or like easy to use interface. So these are the kind of areas that I draw from my research. And some of the technical skills are generation analysis of quantitative qualitative data, do a lot of statistical analysis, which I'm not always sure if I'm that good at it. That's I think that's one of the things with interdisciplinary research, is that you do a lot of different things, but you know that you're not really a specialist on any of them. So you're constantly in doubt about whether what you do actually has any form of merit or not. But people say it does, so I start believing it myself. So you can see I do a lot of web development, especially right now, to deploy my studies online. It's just a really good skill to have. And anything that's like under the hood, analysis, data visualization, I do all this all in Python. And something that I think is very relevant to everyone doing a PhD or any sort of research, something that you learn is that you have to be realistic about what's achievable. So you go into your PhD, you have these grand ideas, which is good. I think it's great to have a vision, but then you spend your first year or first 2 years constantly narrowing down until you have something that can actually be achieved during your PhD. And that's what I mean by focusing your work. You know, you start reading a paper, you think like, oh, sounds great. Oh, I could do this and I could do that. And then, but it just doesn't work this way. If you can't do everything, because you will end up doing nothing. And because research just involves so many different things, it's always good to ask for help. I mean, so often I think like, I should be able to figure this out myself, work on something for like 3 weeks, and then you realize you could have just asked this person in your office who has already done all of these things, and you could have been done in 1 day. And so now I just kind of try to ask for help before I start doing anything, because it can just, there's no shame of not knowing something, and there's also no shame of saying there's no reason for me to know how to do this because this is not my research. Someone has already done this, so why should you don't have to do everything over again. Just take the resources that are already available for you. I won't go over this because I think it's too boring. If anyone is really interested in this, we can go back to this slide. But a few pros and cons about doing a PhD. So I didn't say this in the beginning, I'm kind of halfway through my PhD. Because it's a CDT, my first year was actually kind of a master's, so I technically did a Master of Science, even though I'm not awarded one. But I'm now entering, or in my 3rd year officially, but really in my 2nd year of proper PhD research. And the things that I find really great about a PhD and why I do a PhD is it's really cool to be at the pulse of cutting edge research. So even if your research is, and your research will be very specific, as you can see with my project, and a lot of people will just be like, what the hell is this? But you're still doing something that is really unique, really new, and something that no one has ever done before, which is basically the requirement for doing a PhD, doing something that no one has ever done before. And I think that's quite different from an undergrad project, where you might also do something new, but it's still a little bit more, you can probably go for your undergrad just reproducing something and learning skills, rather than doing something that is really entirely new and will add something to the academic community. And in my opinion, you also value very differently by your university and have more access to resources. I mean, ultimately, you are the person who does a lot of the research that the university puts out there, right? So it might be the academics who put their name on it, but the truth is that a lot of the stuff that is actually done is done by PhD students. And that's not because academics are lazy, they just have so much to do besides that. And as a PhD student, you actually still have the opportunity to really focus on your project without, first of all, without commercial pressure, but also without pressure of like designing a module, like doing all this other administrative stuff that academic staff have to do these days. So you can sometimes just disappear into a rabbit hole for a few weeks and forget about the world around you for some time, which is pretty cool. And you're in a highly stimulated environment, and you have a good chance of embarking on an academic career or research development and industry, I think you're generally quite employable after a PhD. But some of the cons are, even though you do something really new, ultimately your research might have a really small impact, and only a few number of people will actually ever really read your papers or your PhD thesis. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's some PhD thesis out there that no one has ever read, including the supervisor. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, that's just something you have to come to terms with. Like, sure, there's some research out there that just gains a lot of momentum, and that's great, but don't expect that to happen. And a PhD is a lot of work. Like, if you take it seriously and if you're passionate about it, you will work a lot, and you work a lot on weekends, and you will work a lot on evenings and some nights. I mean, even if I don't know anyone who really is good at never working at weekends. It will just happen. I'm not saying it's the best thing, but it will happen ultimately. And you can feel kind of lonely at times because you do something that is very specific to you and no one else does that. Other people might do something similar, but no one's doing exactly the same thing as you. So sometimes you might face a problem and no one can really tell you what to do. Not even your supervisor might really know what's going on, and you just need to have this initiative and like just basically conquering this problem by yourself, which can be frustrating if the results just don't come in. And that's something that will just happen. Like, I'm at this point right now where I'm training machine learning models almost every day, and most of the time they just are garbage, and I just don't know at what point they will finally produce something meaningful, if at all. Maybe my whole approach is like completely messed up and won't work. That's just how it is. And the last point is, don't do it for the money. That's a really, really bad idea. You probably earn more working at McDonald's, at least as a manager. I mean, I get my stipend and I get some money on top for teaching, which is great, and I can live from that. So it's not like that I'm super poor, like by no means. But if I look at my friends who don't do a PhD, who have like jobs, and yeah, I say like they think about buying houses, and I'm like, okay, let's see how much a used bike is on Gumtree, because that's about the money I have available. Yeah, so do a PhD if you feel passionate about academic research, if you're good at working independently, because I think it's one of these words that are thrown around a lot, but really think about how you like to work. Are you someone who doesn't need to be held by anyone's hand? And what I mean by this is, can you envision a project by yourself? Can you say like, this is what I want to do, and this is what the things I need to do, this is the resources that I need, and so on? These are the kind of things that you might need in a PhD. There's PhDs that are a little bit more structured, that actually give you a project, so there's some wiggle room there, but you have to be quite independent. Don't expect that your supervisor will tell you have to do A, B, C, D, and then you get a PhD. It's just not how it works. And you need to be in a certain mindset. So if you feel like you really want to party, travel the world, make loads of friends, have a good time, maybe you should do that first and do a PhD later. So I think I got all of these stuff out in my undergrad. Like, I took a long time doing my undergrad and played in bands and did all this fun stuff, which was really great, but I couldn't do this right now. Like, right now I'm in a good mindset of being like, okay, I don't need to go to parties. I don't need to do anything. I can really just do a PhD. I can disappear in rabbit holes for weeks and just have like bare minimum contact with friends and stuff. This is my way of working. Obviously, other people are different, but the PhD needs to be your priority. You can't do it on the side. Definitely don't do a PhD if you just don't know what else to do. You hear this sometimes from people who are like, yeah, I finished my undergrad. I was really good at it. I don't really want to work. I don't know. These people offered me a PhD. If you're not sure about it, rather start a job and go to a PhD later. Because a PhD takes a long time, and if you're not really behind it, you might end up being really miserable. Don't do it if you want to get rich fast, because you won't. It's definitely not the best route to a high-paying job. A PhD can give you a high-paying job later on, and very often does. But if you just out for the money, just go into a job, you will be in a better position way faster. Like you spend 3-4 more years or even more if you do some postdocs in the academic world. If you then want to go into industry afterwards, you will be significantly older than a lot of other people who are just starting out. So yeah, if you're in for the money, don't do a PhD. And this might be obviously, if you're already tired of university and the academic world, well, don't do a PhD, because it will be a lot more of that. I think that's kind of self-explanatory, but I thought I'd just put it on there. I think this is my last slide. So, actually, yeah. So an interdisciplinary PhD, the cool thing about this is that it doesn't really target people from one specific background. So we actually have someone who studied physics in their undergrad and became a filmmaker afterwards and is now doing research in VR. So we have quite a few people with like an engineering background or music technology like me, just because the Center for Digital Music is quite large at Queen Mary. But then there's people who have like a fine arts background, people who have a classical music background, people who have computer science background, economics, like all sort of things. And like academic merit matters because it's just a selection process, but it also really matters that you are passionate about things, that you can really show that you actually don't just do the bare minimum. So having kind of okayish grades, but having a really good portfolio of extracurricular things might end up being better than having a really good academic profile, like really good grades, but you've never done anything else in your life. Like you've never been in any society, you never done an internship, you never organized any sort of events. So all that stuff that is a little bit in the periphery is actually really important. And what I really like about interdisciplinary PhDs is that I'm interested in a variety of subjects, and I like just combining them and see how they can fit into like a real world problem. And sometimes I just get bored of like machine learning, and then I can go a little bit deeper into cognitive sciences, or if I get bored of this, I mean, I never really get fully bored of it, but you sometimes hit a brick wall. And it's just nice to be able to draw from different directions and be able to combine them. You feel like you get a more holistic view on a problem. But at the same time, it means you probably never really become a specialist in anything. So this is something that has been repeated a lot in the math PhD in my program, that you kind of specialize in not specializing in anything. You're really good at knowing something about a lot of things, but once it comes to like a really tough problem in a specific area, like setting up a very specific machine learning pipeline or really conducting the super thorough psychological research, you might need the experts in that field. So if you're a person who really, really likes going the deepest they can into one specific area, this might not be for you. But if you're someone who enjoys more doing something a little bit more practical that brings together a lot of different disciplines and brings together people from different disciplines, this might be for you. And yeah, I can even imagine if you might do a undergrad in physics, but you're very interested in like fine art on the side, and you might be like an amateur painter. You could actually think about, there might be ways of being able to combine this. I can't think of something now, but I actually have a friend who studied physics, and she's now doing something in robotics with robot arms drawing stuff. So there's a lot of crazy stuff. In the UK is actually a really good place for this. Like when it comes to innovation, I think the UK is really, really great and offers some really great programs, which is actually the reason why I came here, because I went back to Germany because Germany has some perks when it comes to living standards, but academically the UK is actually really strong in my opinion. I think that was it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sebastian. That was fascinating. As much as I'd like to ask you a question right away, I think I should quickly move on, and we'll ask you questions at the end to Joe. Joe Davies, obviously, is a Queen Mary PhD student. He can introduce himself. He knows about his PhD more than I do, again. So, and we're good friends. In fact, I should say this, Beltran and Joe are previous members of SciStar. Joe, were you president or treasurer, or what were you? You are muted, I think. Are we having more technical difficulties? We can't hear you at the moment. No, I'm sorry, we can't hear you. Can you hear us? Okay, you can hear us.
Why don't we maybe take questions on the previous, for anyone who has any questions, and Joe, you can try and get your audio issues sorted until then. So if anyone does have any questions for either Beltran or Sebastian, post them in the comments section. We'll do that while Joe tries to get his issues sorted.
To start with, I just thought I'd ask this question, I guess, both to Sebastian, but maybe Beltran. Or actually, Beltran might have an idea, something to contribute. You said that doing a PhD can help you to do research without commercial pressures. Do you work with external companies, and what sort of responsibilities do you have to these companies as part of your PhD?
So, me personally, I don't, but we have a lot of partnerships officially, even though I'm not really. I have to say to this that the MED program the funding is running out, and the new kind of main CDT in EECS, or in this field, is AIM, which stands for Artificial Intelligence in Music, and they actually collaborate really strongly with industry. But the way I understand it is that they don't pay you. So, but they give you like an advisor. So if in the end you find nothing, it's not like you get fired. You still get a PhD. It's not like you have to build the new iPhone or the new whatever in your PhD. Something that happens very often in these kind of disciplines is that you commercialize your research after all of this. Like Queen Mary actually has. I forgot the name, but they help people commercialize their research into products that they can sell. But during your PhD, you don't have this pressure that you need to make money out of your research, even if you work together with an industry partner.
Are we having any success with Joe? Because I know that he does work with a company, which is why I sort of brought up the question. No, I don't think we can hear you. Oh,
crap. Okay, 1 second.
We can hear you now. We can hear you now. We can't hear you now. It just stopped, whatever you did.
1 sec, let me see.
Okay, we've got you, yeah. No. We get seconds of hearing you, and then it stops again.
Very strange.
Ah, there you go. We can hear that. And we've lost it again.
Unbelievable. 1 second, let me try something.
It keeps working. It was working then again. It's quite random. I don't know. I guess whilst we're waiting, thank you, Beltran. I'll ask another question, which again I'll probably ask at the end. Again, I suppose more aimed at Sebastian, since Beltran's just started, but maybe he'll be able to provide an answer too. How do you deal with periods in which you don't seem to get promising results? And yeah, how do you deal with that? Because obviously it's very explorative, so you don't know what you're going to find.
Having friends is always good. And in the way that I think what's very good is not hiding the fact that you're not doing well at the moment. So you might just chat with someone and be like, my research just kind of sucks. It's really bad. I think it's all shit. And then they say, yeah, I feel the same way. But then you look at their research and you think like, wait, they're doing really well. And then you start thinking like, well, they think they're shit, but they're actually pretty good. So maybe I'm actually not that bad myself. And then you just start feeling a little better about yourself. And I think a lot of people want to be very humble and say like, oh, I'm not good at things and so on. But I actually think it's not the very best character trait. Like sometimes it's good to be a little bit, no, arrogant is the wrong word, but just like really aware of your capabilities and be like, no, I'm actually good at this stuff. So, you know, if someone says I'm bad at it, they just don't know what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to say about that, Beltran? I know that you are quite a motivational person.
Well, I mean, getting stuck with things that don't work, especially being in my room, is not like I can really go ask someone. So I guess, yeah, like Sebastian said, you gotta trust in your skills. So if something's not working, you know, even if it's something you're not entirely familiar with, you still have a background that you can build a judgment with. And I think, yeah, even if you're not getting the results you want or things are not making sense, I think you should rely on like your previous experience and, you know, dealing with adversity if you want. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose I'm aiming this again at Beltran. Going back to the sort of previous question we had, where I was talking about working with industries, how did your PhD within NPL come about? Would you say it came with knowing the right people, or how did that sort of angle itself?
Yeah, so when I was doing my internship, they started hinting at the idea of me working with them when I graduated, but I was very clear that I didn't want to start working. I wanted to for sure keep studying. And then, you know, we sort of kept in touch, and you know, the supervisor that I was with at NPL is Dr. Emma Williams. She had a few projects, but they weren't really what I was looking for. And eventually one of the other group leaders, who's not my supervisor at NPL, had this project come up. And yeah, I mean, it was sort of like very informal how it came about. Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, and I might be wrong. They offered you an MSc, a master's year, and I believe you said you wanted to just go straight into PhD. Is that right?
Yeah, so at the time I was looking at the CET called Mathematics of Planet Earth, which was between Imperial and Reading. And I had been to Reading for like a conference, and one of the people there was good friends with the supervisor at NPL. So we spoke about it, and that's when you know, we started hinting at the idea, okay, like actually there might be a way to go and straight into a PhD and not do a master's. And then eventually, like, you know, it was a sort of mutual agreement that that was how we were going to do it.
Okay, fair enough. I was hoping to ask all three of you these questions, but I'm having to use them up. Okay. I don't know if this is an odd question, but since you sort of put it forward, the earning potential between undergrad and masters, and the earning potential between not having a degree and then doing an undergrad degree is much higher. I think studies have shown in general than the difference between masters and PhD. So do you see that? I don't know how to frame the question. What was it that pushed you towards a PhD? Because obviously it probably wasn't the cash.
I mean, I can just answer this because I I had pretty much half of the money that I had while working. So it was quite a big cut that I took. But for me, it was really that I was in my job, and it was just, like, it was in Stuttgart in Germany, which is like a really industrial area, and you just do the same stuff every day. You feel like, okay, now I'm at this model train company, and then maybe I work for Mercedes later on, and that's gonna be my life. And I will make like good money and can like have a nice life, but it just didn't feel like the things I want to do. It sounds very cheesy, but that's just how it was. I was really dreading the fact that this is the end of the line. This is basically the end of my education. And thinking, oh yeah, PhD, you will actually do all these super interesting, cutting edge things, meet all these new people and so on. It just sounded amazing. But yeah, I think this should be the reason why you want to do a PhD, that you feel really, really passionate about learning something new and doing this research, and that it doesn't matter to you that you just might not be that financially stable for some time.
Okay, thank you. Right, brilliant. So firstly, let's check if Joe's mic's working.
Is it indeed working?
It is working. We can hear you.
Amazing.
Brilliant stuff. You've even got the pop filter and the whole shebang. It's brilliant.
Yeah, I do. I'm in a weird Frankenstein's monster kind of thing, because I've got my laptop is doing my webcam, and then I've got the desktop PC is handling the sound.
Right. I see the comments in the chat, and we will answer your questions. Don't worry. But firstly, I want to get Joe's talk on the way. So, Joe, whenever are you ready?
I am indeed. Let me share
Lovely.
my screen.
Right. I will let you prepare and be ready.
So, can you see that?
Yes, we can. Brilliant.
Let's move that away. Right, brilliant stuff. So now just checking. I can do it. 1 second. All right, let me try it. And instead go on to this. Apologies about this. I'm now having to switch to something else. Okay, let's do it like this. Let's just go for this. Okay, great. So this is artificial intelligence and dark matter. It's what I study. And specifically, I'm kind of trying to make the Terminator play Spot the Difference a little bit. And interestingly enough, actually, this has a bit of an intersection with Sebastian's work, because most of what I do at the moment is variational autoencoders. So we will have a little bit of a discussion on that, and then we'll move on. So introductions. I'm Joe, that is my beautiful face there, and I am a third-year PhD researcher at Queen Mary in the Particle Physics Research Centre, so I'm on the 4th floor. I started a PhD after doing a master's and an undergrad in theoretical physics at Queen Mary as well, so I've been there for nearly 8 years. That is me at an event, the first CDT event actually that I went to. I am part of DiscNet. So if you guys have heard of SEPNet or GradNet, it's the same sort of thing, except this one stands for Data Intensive Science CDT. What they do is they part fund your PhD, and in return for that, they teach you some of the machine learning techniques and also just general data engineering for about a year. And they also require you to do 2 placements. This has kind of changed during COVID, so we're not necessarily relying on people doing 2 placements. I've already done one with a company called Receipt Bank, so it's a fintech company. That was really good. But we're now kind of like having to adjust to life in COVID. My research is based on dark matter, as the name suggests. Dark matter, if we go through a quick introduction, is a real mystery, We know a few things about it. We know that there's about 5 times as much dark matter in terms of energy density, which is basically the combined amount of energy and mass in the universe. We know there's about 5 times as much of that than there is ordinary matter. And that's a point that bears repeating. So there are approximately 60 sextillion planets in the known universe, 400 sextillion stars, 2 trillion galaxies, each of which have about, I think it's oh no, I'm going to get this completely wrong, aren't I? About 100 billion stars or something like that in each one. And all of that stuff mixed with comets and asteroids and big wobbling balls of plasma, all of that stuff is only about 5% of what's actually there. There's then 27% around about of dark matter, and then we've got about 68% dark energy. Dark energy is even more confusing. It's just our description of why the universe is expanding at an accelerated rate rather than a constant one, which it should be, and it's not, which is weird. Now, some of the evidence for dark matter includes galaxy rotation curves. I'm not going to talk about that one today because it's not as interesting as this cool little snazzy picture at the bottom there. That is the bullet cluster, which is a cluster. It's two, at every point of light you see there is a galaxy. It's not just a star. And it's where these two galaxy clusters have one have punched through the other one. And you can kind of see why it's called a bullet there, because there's a little kind of bullet shockwavey thing going on. But what's interesting about this, and what this weird squiggly contour map is showing you, is actually the gravitational centers for these this big sort of conglomerate of galaxies. We expect, right? We expect that the center of mass for this big wobbling thing of galaxies should be at the center, right? Because they interacted. They smacked into each other, and they should have some kind of central point where we have all this matter. And indeed, we see actually that predominantly the radiation is based in the center. So the stuff should be there, case closed. But when we have a look at the gravitational maps, which is what you see here, these sort of contours, we see these 2 points that are the gravitational centers, and they are not in the center there. It's almost as if there is a huge amount of matter that has just passed by, that has not interacted with anything, and has just gone on, moved on, and gone about its daily life without worrying at all about whether or not an interaction has occurred. And that can only happen if you have dark matter there, or something similar. It's called dark because it doesn't emit or absorb radiation. It doesn't interact at all with the electromagnetic spectrum, which is a big problem because all of our detectors, all of our methods of trying to find these sort of things work on a few principles. And one of those is that we can probe using the electromagnetic spectrum or the electroweak interaction specifically. So how do we solve this? Well, we turn to the biggest single machine that has ever been built, which is, of course, the Large Hadron Collider. So a Large Hadron Collider at CERN, you've probably been sort of hammered this all day, every day in lectures and things like this, so I'm only going to go a little bit of a brief overview. The Large Hadron Collider has 4 main detectors. It is 27 kilometers all the way around, based in both Switzerland and France, and if you want to know why, tax. So Switzerland is quite expensive, and France is a bit less expensive, so we kind of straddle both. And managed to get the most out of tax laws in both. So the biggest detector there is ATLAS. ATLAS is the one that I actually work on. It's the one that found the Higgs boson alongside CMS, which is the sister detector, which is all the way at the opposite end. CMS and ATLAS tend not to speak to each other on a day-to-day basis, not because we hate each other or are in some kind of bitter rivalry, although we are and ATLAS are better, but because we don't want to have those results be muddied. So whenever ATLAS discovers something, it's checked by CMS independently and vice versa. And that helps keeps us on our toes and CMS playing catch up. So we've also got 2 detectors either side, says ALICE and LHCb. You may have seen that LHCb recently did a really cool little result. I say little, it's not little, it's great, which was a quad quark particle. So we had 4 quarks, which is weird because that sort of suggests that it would have to be a quark-anti-quark pairing twice, which is super strange because it would just decay, but we managed to find it because we're great. And though ALICE and LHCb do more directed searches than ATLAS and CMS. So what does this mean for the search at ATLAS? Well, the left-hand side here, you can see this sort of little tiny person there. That little tiny person is about 6 feet tall, so you can imagine how big the detector actually is. This is what ATLAS looks like currently. pretty much. Where at the moment we're in some upgrading. So this is it with when it's all the detector's stuff is taken out. The stuff you can see is a mixture of just sort of brackets to house magnets. There's also a lot of cooling pipes there that you can see. But when you actually have Atlas turned on, the kind of interactions that you see, the kind of output is what you see there on the right-hand side in that beautifully photoshopped image. So these are all tracks coming off the main beam line. So that central point is inside what's called the inner tracking detector. It's the most sort of the tightest area there. And all these points are different particles coming off. And then the bits around the side where you see these like little like boxes that are kind of different sizes, those are primarily muons. So we have a few different calorimeters which measure the energy of particles. And muons have to be a special little snowflake because they don't want to play ball. And so we just catch them at the edge. And we manage to calibrate our detectors based on those muons. So what do I actually look at? Well, I look for this signal on the left-hand side, which is when two gluons, which are constituent parts of protons, and we smash protons together at the Large Hadron Collider at 0.999999, the speed of light. When they smash together, they can produce occasionally two B quarks. So a B quark and an anti-B quark. Some people call that beauty. They are wrong. It should be called bottom because that's funny. And then we have a component of missing energy as well. And that component of missing energy, we hope, corresponds to something called a mediator particle. A mediator particle, in this sense, is a particle that talks to both the standard model, which is our best description of the universe. It's been a very good description of the universe up to this point, and still is. And the dark sector, which is represented by these two sort of chi's here. So we think that that mediator particle may be a window through which we can view the dark sector. So, okay, Joe, you say, why not just calibrate your detector or your machine learning models or whatever you're doing to find BB bar plus MET? Surely missing energy and two B quarks is interesting enough that your detector can find it. Yes, our detector can indeed find it. Unfortunately, BB bar plus missing energy is a really, really common output. And to emphasize this, this is our dominant background process on the right. So you can see that there's two quarks that are coming in, a quark, anti-quark, which is what you'll find in protons and neutrons and anything that is, that are in atoms, things like that. And they will interact. They'll produce a Z particle, which is a gauge boson. It is the force carrier, one of the force carriers for the weak force, which we know that dark matter could probably interact with, hence why you might have heard dark matter being described as a WIMP, which is a weakly interacting massive particle. As the name suggests, it interacts by the weak force and it's got mass. So the Z will then decay into a neutrino and an antineutrino. And also from this interaction, we can get a gluon, which is that squiggly line at the bottom there, and that will produce a quark-anti-quark pair. And I know what you're thinking, Joe, you've got this completely wrong. Clearly, you've got two neutrinos up there. That's not missing energy. That is right there, two particles. You got your quark-anti-quark. Okay, admittedly, you can get two Bs out of that. I will give you that, Davies. But at the top there, there's clearly two particles. You're off your rocker. No, unfortunately, because the neutrinos don't get detected by the detector. Neutrinos are super unreactive. They are really annoying in particle physics. So I think I worked this out for funsies when I was doing my undergraduate, but I think in order to have a 50% chance of having a single neutrino interaction, you'd have to have a light year of lead. So neutrinos are really, really unreactive, and so we don't actually find them. And so they express themselves in terms of missing energy. And unfortunately, that missing energy is around about the same as our mediator particle range of energies, which is really annoying. Now, usual techniques for this have been cut-based analyses, where you get a data set and you say, well, you know, I know that my particle is going to have a momentum above 25 gigaelectron volts, which is how we measure energy and mass and things like that. So I cut all the stuff that's below that. And I know as well that this signal is going to have some kind of electron, anti-electron final state as well. So let's cut all the ones that don't have that. And so you cut down and down and down and down until you have hopefully pure signal, pure background. We do that usually with boosted decision trees. So decision tree is a really good machine learning algorithm. It's what we call a white box. So neural networks you might have heard being referred to as a black box algorithms because we don't really know what's going on in the internal machinery there. But boosted decision trees are much better at that. However, they aren't great at discrimination between these sort of things when you get down to the really sort of nitty-gritty level. So they're great at identifying electrons, muons, particles that we already know about, but when we want to discover new things, we need something that's a lot better discriminating. Which moves on to the dark machines group, which is the best named group on the planet. So dark machines group is a group of academics and PGRs that work on dark matter detection using machine learning. We are primarily an Atlas-based group, but there are a few people from LHCb, Alice, and CMS as well. 3 of us work on it at QMUL. It's Dr. Marcella Bonner, who you might know from some of your lectures, who is also my supervisor. There's me, with my massive head in the center there, and on the right hand side you can see Dr. Alison Elliott, who is also a postdoc in the PPRC. We work on anomaly detection, and anomaly detection is best described using a Halloween based spot the difference puzzle. So we're going to play Spot the Difference. We're going to have a really good time, and you can't at all tell that some of this was ripped from a Halloween talk I did, can you? Keep it under your hats. So I'm going to give you like 10 seconds, 15 seconds or something to try and find all, I think there are 8 differences between these 2 images. Some of them are quite obvious, some of them are not, embarrassingly enough. About 10 minutes before I gave the original talk this slide is based on, my supervisor said, you do realise you've missed out 1 or 2 of these differences. And I was like, oh, good. So that means my PhD is going to go down the tubes then. Good stuff. OK, so whilst I've been rambling on, you've no doubt been finding all of those differences. So I'm going to show you them now. I might just mark them on this one side here. So these were all the differences here. And so let's talk about what is actually happening here. It means that your brain has taken both of these images and almost created a composite of the 2, right? It has created this kind of intermediary image. It's the same thing that something like Google Translate will do. So Google Translate, when going from one language to another, creates an intermediary language just from scratch, and then we'll be able to translate into that and back. And so this is what you're doing with your brain. Now, we're very good at anomaly detection. Entirety of our lives from 100,000 years ago in terms of evolution have been about doing this anomaly detection, pattern recognition. And then we invented mathematics so that we can describe how many arms we've lost to the cougar. So if we can do this, then you can obviously have a go at this. So I'll give you another sort of 10, 15 seconds to have a go at finding the differences between these 2 tables. OK. And if anyone is actually able to do that, let me know so that I can steal you and I can complete this PhD on time. You shouldn't be able to do this. And some of you are going to be saying, well, there's a lot of differences between those 2, and there are. So instead now of having hard and fast 0s and 1s, we now have a look at distributions and things like that. So one of these data sets is real data from Atlas. Another one of these data sets is what we call Monte Carlo simulation. Monte Carlo simulation is so named because of Monte Carlo, which has got a lot of casinos, and basically involves random number generation and passing that random number through a bunch of different filters and a bunch of different algorithms, and it produces this data. These data, I should say. And finding the difference between these 2 is really important, but also it's about feeding in some kind of background data, which usually is generated from the Monte Carlo, and then trying to then have a look at what signal data looks like. And we do this via a variational autoencoder. Now, a variational autoencoder is a continuation of a normal autoencoder, and those are based on taking an image, for instance, deconstructing it into its eigenvectors, which is what you would do with an autoencoder. So you get the lowest possible representation of what that image possibly is by having a look at the matrix of the pixel values, reducing that to eigenvalues, storing that in some kind of latent space, some kind of in-betweeny space, often called a bottleneck, after being encoded, and then you decode from that bottleneck the original image. Now, the benefit for that is that usually it means you can denoise your image quite well. So if you've got a picture that has a lot of static on it and you pass it through an autoencoder, that's been properly trained, of course, you can remove some of that static because it just has that background image. It's also very good for distribution of data, so you can store something in a bottleneck form, so in the eigenvector form, then on the other end you can have the same algorithm and it will decode it. Now, that's great, but if you want to then have a bit more sort of an understanding of how the distributions are related, rather than pure reconstruction and deconstruction, you want to have a look at variational autoencoders. They are also very, very good at something called interpolation. And so you can generate brand new signals that you've never seen before from just sort of sliding the scale along from what you kind of choose. And that's done by not having eigenvectors be the central point anymore, but instead you have two vectors. You have one that is a distribution of the means, so a collection of the means of the original image, and another that is a collection of the variances. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to, instead of doing eigenvectors, which are fairly sort of, you can think of them as like a digital version of this, you then switch to a more analog version where you can just say, well, instead of reconstructing from the original means and the original variances, what if I add one, right? What if I just add one to them? What image will be created? What if I then slide along to a new value? What image will be created, and so on and so forth, without losing the detail from the original image, which is great. So the sort of best description I have of this is if we have some kind of, don't worry too much about what bivariate means or Gaussian mixture distribution, just know that this is basically a data distribution based on both an X and a Y, and it looks like this. So this is our truth data, this is the real deal. We then throw a bunch of points at it, and you can see that because we've trained on this distribution here, anything inside, any of the data that falls inside gets marked as nominal, gets marked as normal. Anything on the outside gets marked as an anomaly. And that's essentially what we're doing. So you can see that there's a few sort of misclassified events as well, and that's always going to be the case for machine learning. I'm always really, really, really dubious of any machine learning result that is perfectly accurate, like 100%, because it usually means I've got something wrong. So how is it actually made? Well, this is a Jupyter Notebook output of my algorithm that I made with dark machines. So there's a paper coming out soon. There's also a hackathon that's going to happen as well that we're trying to organize. But basically what we were doing is we were trying to see whether variational autoencoders can be used for anomaly detection and what variational autoencoder would work, because there's loads of different variations. The one that I used was, I'm quite proud of not only the algorithm, but the name. So the name is a convolutional neural network input beta variational autoencoder. Thank you very much. Otherwise known as Connie. Now, Connie was made to be a kind of an amalgamation of 3 different types of algorithm. It used a convolutional neural network as an input, which is very, very good at having a look at images. Now, we kept the tables of data, which isn't an image, so you might be thinking, well, why did you do that? Well, you can imagine that if we've got our table of data and some of that data is sort of it's not got the same number of columns, because the data itself was about particles being produced in each event, and a different number of particles are produced each time, so you get a different number of sort of energy values and PT and transverse momentum values, etc. So in some areas of the table, so more to the left-hand side of it, there would be a lot of data, and some there wouldn't be. It'd be quite sparse, which is kind of how an image looks. If you take a picture of a dog on a green background, the doggo is going to be the good bit, and it's going to be the dense data. There's going to be a lot of interesting data with the dog, with lots of hair and that sort of thing, and the outline of the dog. Grass is green. Grass is pretty much green wherever you go. Background data, not that interesting. And so we say that it's kind of sparse. And that's what we're doing here. Now, this went through a bunch of different iterations. Sebastian, I completely feel your pain when it comes to not having a very good algorithm. I worked on this for 4 or 5 months and then managed to produce something that gave me reliable results. And I presented it, and I'm happy to say that it did 5% better than flipping a coin. So sometimes in science and scientific analysis, things don't work, and that's okay. A negative result is still a result. It's still getting put in the paper, but it's basically just us going, hey, this doesn't work, don't do this. We know it doesn't work because a poor PhD researcher did 4 or 5 months of work on it and it didn't work. Now, I primarily use Python for this, and specifically Keras and TensorFlow, which are some really good Python packages for machine learning and artificial intelligence. Some people use PyTorch as well, which is Facebook's one. The one on the right there is a controversial programming language. It's known as Root, which is what CERN, so CERN invented Root. It's based on C++, so I do have algorithms I've worked on specifically for the past month and a half. Admittedly, today I found out that that algorithm was wrong, but we won't talk about that, which is an amalgamation of both C++ and Python. Root is a little bit controversial because it's like Marmite, if even Marmite hated Marmite. So some people really like it. Some people think it is the worst thing to happen to programming since Fortran. So what do we what do we do next with this? Because this is now sort of over. That's kind of old research. Well, first of all, the new sexy analysis type that's come out of Atlas and an awful lot of other detectors at the moment is long-lived particles. So we've been focusing mainly on things like pions and pi mesons, which is a short-lived particle. But we are now having a look at long-lived particles, which may actually miss being caught by our detectors, but we could calibrate them just a little bit, just tweak them a little bit. And we may actually be able to find some of those long-lived particles. And one of those things could be semi-visible jets. So just to give a quick rundown of these, a jet is something that is produced when a quark, so this B quark anti-B quark pairing that you heard me talk about earlier, what will actually happen is that quark will go along and it will excite a bunch of different particles around it, or it will cause spontaneous production of photons or something like this, or spontaneous emission of gluons because it's just lowering in energy. And those gluons themselves can then decay into other things, into other quarks. The B quark itself can decay into other quarks. And what will happen then is from any kind of interaction of two protons, you get this spray of particles, numerous sprays of particles that sort of evolve as a kind of cone. And we call those cones jets. And we artificially make these jets. We draw cones around these sort of sprays of particles. And if you have in your jet more mass than you thought you had, this kind of missing energy component, it's a bit fatter than you thought it was, there may be some particles that aren't being picked up by the detector, and that could be dark matter. And so we have a look at semi-visible jets, and we have a look at the fraction of invisible particles, so how much mass have we actually got versus what we expect, and we may find some kind of evidence of dark matter. And on the right-hand side, you can see that all the dashed arrows, those are all of our semi-visible bits, and the QTD jet is the visible bit. So that's the next analysis. We're going to be using anomaly detection. I am currently working on building my own, well, our own framework for this, which is quite hard work. We're trying to sort of use existing code, and just to put it into perspective of how difficult it is to kind of get certain bits of code to talk to each other and make your own analysis framework, the tutorial that I found online that taught me how to do this said, and I quote verbatim, "Then some magic happens and you get an output." We still don't know, because some of this legacy code is so spaghettified that we still don't kind of know how it works. So the general sort of ethos has been, leave it alone, don't touch it, it works, just leave it, it's fine, it's okay. And we're trying to sort of get away from that a little bit, so we're trying to create our analysis framework. Secondly, I'm also going to be using something called an FPGA. So if you've heard of these, then you already know how cool they are. If you haven't, think a computer chip that is rewritable at the hardware level. So it's almost like having a rewritable disk that you used to burn CDs on. If you're a jaded millennial, you'll know what a rewritable disk is and what burning CDs was. But you can imagine that once you have a programming language that is able to actually do this sort of electronic design, you can then put it onto a computer chip like an FPGA, and it will do that. So what we're trying to do is put an AI onto one of these things. So essentially what that means is me programming an artificial intelligence at the logic gate level, which is like trying to code in binary, and then we'll be able to take that. It will just be PCIe, so it'll be able to be plugged into a desktop PC. You'll run your data over it, and instead of there being a software-hardware interface, it will just be an AI inbuilt into the hardware, which means that technically, I am making a very stupid brain that's good at one thing, which I think is very cool. So the last thing I want to come on to, I always end with a XKCD comic as well, just in case you guys are tired and don't want to listen to me speak or don't want to watch the slide. Artificial intelligence is the newest tool in computational physics, and it works. It works really, really, really well. It's very good at what it does. So if you want to go into a PhD in physics, really, it would be a good idea for you to learn some programming. You can learn on the job though. So when I started my PhD, I had sort of minimal coding experience, and within a year, DiskNet and the university got me to the point where I was giving PhD researchers lectures on how to do artificial intelligence from the ground up. So that you can learn it if you're really interested in it, which I am. Something I also wanted to say, which I'm glad that Sebastian touched on as well, is you need to figure out why you want to do a PhD. You need to figure out why. You need to understand it's hard work, right? It's really hard work. And I will tell you this now, as a third-year PhD, I don't want to scare you off, and it may be getting a bit serious now. I don't want to scare you off doing a PhD at all because, you know, I'm doing one and they're good. There is high likely chance there will be some kind of serious sort of health hill that you have to climb. It is very, very difficult. It's very, very stressful. There's an awful lot of the time where you're kind of surrounded by people that are so good at what they do that you're just being bombarded with imposter syndrome. My best sort of description of why you should want to do a PhD is this. If you want the letters doctor before your name, DR before your name, that is a valid reason to try and get a PhD, right? Because trust me, that has kept me up at night where I've been like, oh, I want to get rid of the PhD. I don't want to do a PhD. But if I stop now, I won't be able to call myself Dr. Davies, which means I won't be able to call myself Double D, which is hilarious. So I've obviously got to continue doing this PhD. That's sidelined. If you find that a PhD is the way that you get into the job you want, or if it's something that you've wanted to do for a long time, which is both a fact in my case. I've wanted a PhD since I was 16, and I think that my AI and AI research and development will mean I have to do a PhD. If that's the case, then you should do one. If there is any other way for you to get to the position that you want to get to in life, and if you are doing it because you have no idea what else to do, please think again for doing a PhD. I have a supreme love for the subject, and I've seen meetings on whether or not you can justify a 0.5% increase in uncertainty. It's that granular when you get to this level. It's very, very interesting if you're interested in it, and this is not me putting you off a PhD. It is incredible to do it. I was able to work at CERN before the COVID hit, so I was there for 2 months, and they said you have to be there. I was like, right, fine, I'm not going to send me to CERN, that's great. And working on site was one of the best things I've ever done. It was fantastic, such a good environment. But you do have to have a conversation with yourself about what is, you're something smart, don't do it. Or at least have another conversation with yourself. That is my email address. If you guys ever want to, I will end it there. If you have any questions, please do let me know, obviously.
Okay, brilliant, brilliant, Joe. Thank you. Probably best it ended where it did actually, because your microphone started to break up quite badly there.
Oh no.
Right, so I have a couple of questions because I know people will want to shoot off, and so will you. Oh yeah, thank you to everyone. Thank you to all three of you. Cool.
Yeah,
I'll read out the questions that have been put in the chat first because I don't want to be greedy. Beltran's already sort of answered this, but I'm going to ask it generally. How many PhD placements can you apply for? Is there a limit to the number of applications you can send? And did you apply to many yourselves? I'm going to add to that.
So yeah, I guess I can remember this. So I applied for 5 or 6, I think. I applied for most places in London that were offering PhDs because I knew that I wanted to stay in London. My partner at the time was also based in London, so we kind of wanted to just sort of stay in the area. You can apply for as many as you want, and actually it will be a bit of a red flag if, when asked, you say, no, I've only applied for this one place, because they want you to take agency with it. Certainly, I would say as well that I nearly didn't get my PhD, even with Queen Mary. Bit of a stab, but whatever, I'm not bitter. But like, just keep hammering at it and keep going with it. But apply for as many as you want. Apply for abroad as well if you have the inclination. It may cost a bit of money, but it is, I've known people that have gone to Canada, to ESO as well, so the European Space Observatory.
Southern Observatory.
There we go, Southern Observatory Space Observatory. What a stupid thing to say. But they've gone to like there in the Netherlands, I think that's based. So there's loads of places you can go.
Okay.
Funny that you say sorry, but it's like funny that you say you shouldn't just apply for one, because I just applied for one.
Amazing. Well
Actually,
done.
all in all, I applied for one just after my PhD, just after my master's, and it was horrible. I didn't get accepted. The interview was horrible. I was totally unqualified for this PhD and not ready for it. So it was actually good. But then for me, it was like, okay, I have a job. I could wait, but this sounds really cool. So I really want to do it. But it was kind of like, oh, I really want to do this specific PhD. So I'm going to apply for it. So I think, yeah, it's about whether you can justify that you just applied for one. You can do whatever you want if you have a good reason for it, I would say.
I think from what I've seen, it heavily depends on your situation as well. I know that our last talk, James Neller was talking about his PhD. His PhD went on for 6 years, and he explained that he had left after doing a master's. He had a year where he was trying to get jobs, got nothing, and then Queen Mary actually went to him and asked him, would you like to do a PhD? So he never even had to apply. So I guess it heavily depends on your own situation. And I just thought I'd point this out. He actually said to me, to sort of quote Joe, but also to quote him, he said, if the reason you want to apply to do a PhD is because you want the word doctor, please don't. He said that was the worst reason to do it. So take whoever's advice you want. It's not my words.
I would say not initially, but I guess once you're like 2.5 years into it, it might keep you going.
It does. It does, let me tell you. The idea of having DR before your name starts to become more and more sort of prominent as you fail more and more during the PhD.
Okay, right. So let's move on to Kamani's question. What is your favourite thing about doing a PhD? I'll throw that to.
Actually, sorry, I just took it. First thing that comes to mind is the freedom in a way. I can do. So I wake up and my wife has to work, and I'm just kind of like, I'm just not going to work. I just got to do something else and then work later. I really like that kind of flexibility. I mean, it still ends up that I work a lot, but I work whenever I want, and I kind of work on things that I really care about, and it makes it easier to work a lot. So if I work a lot on something that someone else tells me to do, that would kind of suck. But if I work on stuff that I want to work on, and I work on it in the time that I allocate towards it, and that's what I really like about my PhD, at least.
Anyone else, or shall I move on to the next question?
Yeah, so another one is that I think that there's obviously the cutting edge research side of it, and that kind of, completely right, Sebastian, in terms of the kind of freedom to do that as well and to go kind of carve your own path in that way. There's also there's a social side to this as well. So before COVID started, I was lucky enough to, because of, I was around before COVID was there in the PhD. There was a lot of conferences, a lot of meetups, a lot of networking, and that sort of thing. which was really good fun. A lot of conferences held at at hotels, and you kind of get to compare breakfast across multiple different hotels, which is quite good. And seeing other PhD researchers and getting involved in that. Yeah, definitely. And I think the LTA, so we do a long-term attachment, which is what I was doing in Switzerland, was also fantastic for this. So that was definitely one of the better parts, being in not just visiting CERN, but having, 1 second, I think I have it down here somewhere. Oh yeah, here we go. Oops, 1 second. So yeah, there we go. My CERN card, which I haven't been able to use in over a year now. But being able to be a part of that community where you're on site with literally thousands of people who all have doctorates and are all doing very granular sort of sides of research, you do feel it. You really do feel it. And when you're in, offices and things like that with other PhD researchers, there is a palpable element of we are doing something great here,
Okay, brilliant. So I have a bunch of questions. I'm going to make them sort of quick fire, but sort of not at the same time. My first question is, what is your day-to-day routine as a PhD student? Do you have set hours that you have to put in, set times? Yeah, so, and how much time do you spend per week as a PhD student?
It's really, really hard to say. I don't have set hours. No one is checking if I'm doing any work. I mean, obviously you have to bring results at some point, but no one is saying, oh, you have to work 40 hours. I think Queen Mary says something, full time is at least 20 hours, which is a joke. That's how much I work in 2 days sometimes. But there's a lot of other stuff going on. So I do some teaching, as you know, Luke. So this is something I have to show up when the lecture is happening, of course. And there's meetings. You meet with supervisors. You meet with other people. And I like organizing events. So I organize a lot of events, and that's more like a real job, let's say, where they have to be at certain places at certain hours. But other than that, I do a lot of work at night. I like working at night, because no one's bothering me. So if you take a PhD seriously, not working enough or not getting enough hours in won't be an issue. I can tell you that for sure. But yeah, no fixed hours. You're quite free, I would say. But that also depends on who you work with. And if you're like part of a research team, you might be more scheduled.
I know that James Neller, he told me that he used to come in at 1 p.m. and then he would stay until something like 10 or 11 because he didn't like mornings. So it's very much up to you what time you want to do your work, as long as you get the work done.
I like doing exercise in the morning because people are not at the gym or at the park and stuff like this. You can do all this other stuff in your life at times when other people don't have time, like going to the supermarket when no one else is there. That's kind of fun. Really hated this in my job. Like, you go home when everyone else goes home, and then the supermarket is so freaking packed and everyone is super stressed out, yourself included, and now I can just go whenever I want. Yeah, it's the small joys in life that you learn to enjoy.
I will also say, on the point of how much work you do, I think it is variable as well. You can kind of set it. Queen Mary does technically speaking, you are available from 10 till 4. But if you ask people like me, who I'm the UCU PGR rep for Queen Mary, so if you ask me, that is a little bit contentious, but whatever. There are some weeks where you will spend 30, 40 hours working. That's fairly low though. Most of the time it's between 40 and 50. For the past month and a half, well, not for the past month, I guess. Certainly for the entirety of February, maybe so large. I was working, I think, 60, 70-hour weeks because I was trying to get this analysis work done. And actually, that also comes back to a point that Sebastian made earlier, where it was, if I had asked someone for help earlier on, I wouldn't have had to spend that much time on it. So do that. But you also get opportunities to teach, which I really like. Teaching is great. Doing outreach projects like this is fantastic, really good fun. But there are going to be times when you are working like 11 till 12 at night, as in like 11 in the morning till 12 at night. But it is, I'm in an analysis team as well, so I have got a number of analysis teams, so I have got set times when I have to be in meetings. But day to day is just sort of wake up, have a lazy breakfast because I too suck at mornings, and then just code for the rest of the day. That's what you're doing, bug fixing mostly.
Okay, which one should I ask now? Okay, this sort of fills in. I know the answer to these questions, by the way, but I feel like our audience might not. So, right. Do you have to teach as part of a PhD? Is it compulsory? And is it paid?
You do not have to teach unless you are part of a specific teaching PhD. So some PhDs, especially if you are on a Tier 4 visa, for instance, will be linked to being able to teach. I found that teaching is really good. I was really privileged to be able to teach quantum mechanics and symmetry, which was my favorite module when I was an undergrad. I love the module. Steve Thomas is a babe, love him. So that was really good. You do get paid for it. You get paid quite a good wage, actually. It's not too bad. It's sort of between 12 and 15 pounds, depending on what kind of module you're doing. You also get paid to do coursework sometimes as well, if you're lucky. Niche, how dare you? QMS is brilliant. So yeah, there's loads of different opportunities to do that, and primarily as well because you're looking at lecturers that you already know, especially if you've been there for as long as I have. Usually the process is going up to a lecturer going, can I teach? They say yes, they give you a mark scheme and days to be there, and you go for it.
Okay, I feel like you've answered that one quite fully. So I'm going to ask Nisha's question first before I ask any more of mine. Was there ever a time where you felt like just giving up on the PhD? What did you do to motivate yourself to keep going?
I think with everything that's hard, you just very often think, why don't I just quit, right? I'm not pretty sure. I maybe sounds a little preposterous, but I don't think I ever had problems really motivating myself doing it. But I think it's just, I think the things that put me into a position where I don't have these existential questions is that I mean, I do have existential questions, but there used to be worse, let's say. I have people that I talk to and talk also about not just PhD stuff, but talk about how they feel and what their life is like. And then you just kind of, you talk about these things because before they become a really big issue for yourself. And I think this is really, really important, especially for PhDs. We have a tendency to be kind of sole lone wolf people, and it will destroy you, and you might like end up not finding, or like digging yourself into a deep hole that you can't get out. But if you reach out to other people, talk to them, talk about your concerns, or just vent from time to time, I think you're in a good position to cope with these times where you don't feel very good. But I actually agree with Joe that just thinking about having like a doctor in the title, it can be a motivation, you know? It's like, if I finish this, I don't just get like a lousy piece of paper, I get a cool title as well, and that's kind of cool. Like, I mean, I'm already halfway there, might as well like do it another 2 years, so yeah. But yeah, find your community. I think community is just really important at anything we do. And don't just do a PhD. Also do some other stuff from time to time.
Brilliant. That fits straight into the next question from Kimani. How does the social life of an undergrad compare to the social life of a PhD?
So my undergrad was. Oh wait, this is recorded, right? So I did a lot of partying and stuff and things that had not much to do with university. That's a lot less now. But that's also.
Sebastian, we do pub crawls in the society, don't worry.
Yeah, but I played in like 2 bands. I went on some cool gigs. We toured like through Europe and stuff. This was really great, but it was all like kind of for fun, not for. I didn't have a vision back then for anything. I just did stuff because I wanted to, and now social life is a little bit more boring, maybe. Like, I mean, I'm also 30, so like friends are starting to have kids and stuff. So for me, it's very different from my undergrad. So I'm not sure. Maybe I think you're both younger than me, so maybe that, and you're closer to your undergrad age. So maybe you can answer this question better than me, actually.
Yeah, I mean, so the difference between the two, or the big difference between the two, at least I've seen, is that you still have kind of freedom like that you had at undergrad as well, to do stuff that you want to do. So I actually, when I was in Switzerland, I also played in a band during my PhD. So you still have this freedom to do the stuff you did as an undergrad. The difference is that you are older. So there's certain things that you've kind of already done that you don't really need to do. You don't need to go to a party and stay up until 4 a.m. every single time. Sometimes you do just want a bed and a cup of tea. Like, you've done that, right? So you have slightly less time at the PhD, but more money. Not a lot more money, but you have enough that you kind of, especially if you come straight from doing a master's, you're just kind of like, oh, I don't owe the government back this money. This is actually mine now. So I can actually spend money on sort of slightly more expensive things. So instead, for instance, of trying to find out which pub does the most alcohol for the least price, and then going to Dixie Chicken and getting some kind of like £2 meal that has got questionable meat inside it, you're not really sure whether or not it's actually above board, you can now actually go out for a meal and stuff like that. And so once you start having a taste of that sort of good life, it's like difficult to go back. Not saying that I don't want to go to Dixie Chicken, but you have more money, slightly less time, but it's still fine. Like, the social life is still good.
Okay, sort of pins in again to my next question. How does the funding behind a PhD work? Are you paid a grant? Do you have some kind of student loan? How do you actually survive as a PhD student financially?
So I just wanted to say, because I said you just don't get a lousy piece of paper for your bachelor's. I in no ways wanted to discredit a bachelor's. I think it was bad wording for me. It's just, once you're in your PhD, undergrad time seems kind of long ago, so you need something else to motivate you.
Just being a little bit snide. I am actually looking forward to getting my last piece of paper.
I just realized afterwards that maybe that wasn't the best kind of wording. So I just wanted to make this sure. A bachelor is amazing, and you should be incredibly proud of completing one.
Thank you. We don't all get a little DR before our name. That's.
So I get funded by the UKRI, as I said earlier, and I get, it's £16,777. That's a really interesting sum. So that's around £1,400 a month that I get without taxes. So if you do teaching on top of that, you can actually, in some months, get like £2,000, which is decent even for London. Like you can survive on that. It's you could earn a lot more if you were in the industry, but that's how I finance myself. You can get student loans now for a PhD. I'm not sure if I would recommend that. You can apply for external funding, which a lot of people do. The problem is that very often it's like maybe for a year or two, and then you have to reapply for funding during your PhD. That is something that is especially prevalent in the humanities. And this puts like a whole different level of stress on you. Like imagine you have to do all this research, and on top of that, you don't even know whether you can continue because you don't have enough money. So being in a STEM subject is really great because there is usually a lot more funding. If you look at the funding that the ESPRC has compared to the AHRC, it's like a multitude of that. So, but definitely try to find a PhD that has some sort of funding or a contract attached to it that pays you. If you go to Europe, you find that you actually get a wage that you pay taxes on, and so as well, like paying taxes seems like not a great thing, but it means you already pay money into a retirement fund and so on, which, you know, that it might be something you want to do. But yeah, usually as a PhD student, you get some sort of money either through funding or through a wage. Sorry, it was a bit of a rant. Not rant, a rumble.
No, that's exactly the kind of information we're looking for. I don't imagine anything. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? I assume you're all on similar sort of funding pools.
The only thing that I will say is that not all of your funding will come from things like UKRI or STFC. So I'm, for instance, on a studentship, which is essentially like the university equivalent of a scholarship for PhDs. So the university directly pays my salary, which it's about the same as Sebastian's as well. And then, like you say, you can do teaching and things like that on top of that. You also have, just to add, a pot of money to do things like conferences, to get equipment. So just putting on my union hat now, if you do get to a PhD and you need a laptop, for instance, so if you are doing something like computer analysis, like computational physics, like I am, you are entitled to like a laptop and things like that, and they will pay for that for you and sort that out. Yeah, there we go. So there's a lot of funding there, and the reason that you have that funding is because this is STEM. So you find that in an awful lot of other disciplines, they have to self-fund. They don't have as much money in those disciplines. So you should be kind of aware of that as well, just so you don't kind of put your foot in it and go, oh, what should you do with your funding? And they'll go, oh, I don't have any. So, you know. Yeah.
A very great thing that I realized is that, especially if you're someone who's involved and you do stuff for the program. So I do, as I said, do a lot of organizing events and outreach and stuff like this, public engagement. So when I usually ask for things, I just have to give like a very meek justification why I need this, you know. So I just kind of say like, yeah, this is like relevant for my research, and then my supervisor says, yeah, let's milk the university for what I got. It's a little bit extreme, but that's what I said earlier. University values kind of differently. They know that they don't pay you a lot for what you're worth, so they try to make your life a little easier through these perks, like getting a laptop or getting money to put studies on Prolific, which we do right now. It's this online platform for participant studies. And that's pretty cool. Yeah, you shouldn't pay out of pocket for things that you need for your PhD.
Or for your society when the student union refuses to pay for the Zoom membership. Anyway, intent. Okay. Finally, my last question. So if anyone else has questions, this is your chance before we wrap up. As a PhD student, do you have any responsibilities? And in general, how do you work with your supervisor? Do you have regular meetings, or what's what's the relationship with your supervisor, considering you're going to be working with them for 3, 4, maybe if you're unlucky 6 years, you know?
Oh, okay, cool. I'll go first. Okay, yeah, so my supervisor is Dr. Marcella Bonner, who some of you will know already. And she is awesome. She's absolutely wonderful. She is a formidable woman, incredible woman. She is very sort of matter of fact and quite blunt, which is good and bad, mostly good. But we have weekly meetings, and then we will also meet with other groups that we're in as well. And we'll talk about what I'm doing, what I need to be doing to continue on. And then we'll have an open discussion. So what you'll find is that with your supervisor, especially if you're doing something where you're kind of doing a continuation of research they've done before as well, if you have started to get into something that perhaps they aren't an expert in. So for instance, Marcella is fantastic, obviously, at physics, specifically B physics, but has kind of just started getting into the machine learning world. I mean, she's still able to do it, but like I've had to, by design of the PhD, had to go a little bit more into detail. So we'll have an open discussion on what that means. And it is really cool because it means that there are times when both Marcella and Alison actually will turn around and say, what do you think we should do? And as much as that is a bit of stress, they actually genuinely do care about what you have to say, because there is this kind of, you do have a expertise. Let's make something clear. If you're doing a PhD or any kind of postgraduate, so if you're doing a master's, the reason that you're doing it is because they know that you can, right? They know that you're able to do it, which means that you do have a worthwhile opinion when it comes to physics and when it comes to this sort of thing. So yeah, it's nice to be on that sort of almost the same level there, to the point where usually mine and Marcella's meetings, and with Alison as well, end up with just bitching about people sending emails and deciding we're not going to send kind regards, but regards instead, because we're that British.
Yeah, I think Beltran put a really good point in the chat, is that they want to work with you, and that's really different from an undergrad, I think, where I think you constantly have this attitude that you want to please the academics, but now it's like the academics are humans, and a lot of the stuff they say is like simply not a good idea. It's just how it is. Like they tell you stuff, and then you think about it, and sometimes you decide that it's just a bad idea, and then you tell them the next week, and they say like, yeah, that's probably was a bad idea. You know, like it's way more of, they know more than you about a lot of things, but you know also more about other things, as Joe said. But in terms of how it works for me is I meet my supervisor once a week for a 1-hour meeting, which is the way it should be, but it isn't always that way. I heard from other people that their supervisors are very unavailable, which really sucks. Meeting my supervisor once a week, first of all, makes me motivated to actually produce something new every week that I can talk about. And I mean, I like my supervisor. Sometimes I feel bad, and he just says like, "Oh yeah, this is actually pretty good," you know. And today I got a poster got accepted for a conference, and he just instantly writes like, "Oh yeah, you know, well done, good job." It's just kind of nice to have someone there who cares a little bit about you. But saying that, so I have 2 supervisors, a first and a second one, which is usual for us. I'm not sure how it is for the other 2. And Mathieu is actually my second supervisor, who you know, Luke. And so Mathieu is a very fun guy, and I went to the pub with him a few times. We once got really drunk and went to the studio at like midnight and jammed. Oh God, it was really, really funny. But I thought, oh yeah, I don't think I can work with him as a first supervisor, because we would like get stuck too much in like funky ideas. So I chose a supervisor that I thought is a little bit more down to earth and a little bit more, I want to say, bland in some things, because I think he reins me in if I go a little bit too wild in what I want to do. So knowing what kind of person you are and what might be possible pitfalls in your research, you think you should consider that when choosing a supervisor.
Beltran, as a fairly new student and as someone who's only been able to do this online, how have you found working with your supervisor?
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Not gonna lie, I'm dying to start going to the office. It's complicated given that I'm based between two places, and it becomes a lot more bureaucratic, and you lose a lot of the, especially like getting up to speed, just like the informal chats over coffee. But my supervisors are like extremely like supportive. And so I have a weekly meeting with them, which might change in the future years. But for example, given that I'm like one of the younger persons, and there's quite a new intake of physics students, there's quite a generation gap in coding. So they prefer IDL and MATLAB and software that's licensed, whereas all the younger ones prefer Python. And so there's definitely like that sort of push from the younger generation to show them that actually like there's a lot of value in having people that use Python and are up to date with sort of the day-to-day coding. So it's quite interesting, yeah. I'm excited to start going to the office. Yeah, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I think an important piece of knowledge that I got from the very first event that I think has been brought up and I want on camera was they explained that when you go to definitely an in-person interview for a PhD, they are interviewing you, but you should also interview them. Ask them questions. Try to get to know them. Is this person someone you're going to gel with? Because it's so important that they said, look, you're going to get into arguments with this person. You're going to have great fun with this person, because over that many years and over something that, lots of money's invested into and their reputation's invested into, your time's invested into, there's always going to be, the arguments and good times. So when you're applying for a PhD, or I'd say anything, any job, whatever, treat it as an interview of them as well, and make sure that they're nice, essentially, that they'll work with you. I see we're all having a chat about Sashiv's question.
But there was a question about how to get Python knowledge in. So personally, I just learn stuff best if I actually apply them to a project. But in terms of resources, Coursera is good, LinkedIn Learning is good, but it's not free. YouTube, there's so many good YouTube tutorials out there. I watch like YouTube tutorials on anything, and at some point you even find like the really boring stat ones kind of interesting. That's when you know that you're like at the end of a line that you yeah, but very often I try to learn something because I thought I have to learn it, and then I started some tutorial and I just thought it was super boring and never actually learned it. But when I have a project and I just start doing it, like obviously you need some basic knowledge, and then you run into these issues like, oh, how do I solve this? You look it up and then you realize, oh, I need to learn this, and then you kind of gradually become better at it. At least that's how I work on it. So, and then obviously a lot of people say learning Python is very important these days, but really think about whether it's important for you. Now, I wanted to learn C++ because it's kind of a really important language in digital signal processing, but then ultimately I learned a little bit of it, but I never use it, and I've just realized it would be pointless for me to use it. I don't really need it. Yeah, but if you really want to use it, find a project. Maybe rather than doing something in Excel the next time, try to do it in Python and Pandas or something, just to start with.
If you're also going to do machine learning, So I've put in a few like websites and things. Obviously, as well, do the if you can get anything from Adrian Bevan, please do that. Adrian Bevan is fantastic. He's for those of you who don't know him, he's a lecturer at Queen Mary. He's also the head of the PPRC. I've worked with him on delivering some PhD tutorials for machine learning and that sort of thing. So the best thing to do as well, if you want to go into machine learning and artificial intelligence, please, please, please ignore every single advert that says you can learn machine learning in like 10 days or learn it like an hour. Like, it's complete rubbish, complete bullshit. What you need to do is, and I can do some kind of shameless plug and show like a 2-hour lecture I gave online fairly recently on this, but the best thing for you to do is to learn stats. Go and, it's boring, I know it's boring, but go and try and learn some kind of statistical data analysis. Find Adrian Bevan's notes on statistical data analysis if you can. They are fantastic. If not Adrian Bevan, look for a guy, and I'll write his name in the chat as well, called Glenn Cowan. He taught me in the first 6 months of the PhD. He is like the be-all and end-all of like statistical data analysis for that sort of thing, especially for physics. Yeah, Seth Stenz is also great, but you need to get some kind of background on what's actually going on in a machine learning algorithm. So for instance, if you're having a look at something like a neural network, you want to know what backpropagation is, which means you also want to know how to do things like gradient descent analysis. You want to know what an activation function actually is. You need to learn what a sigmoid is and what sigmoid curves are and what regression actually means. Don't just use it an out-of-the-box algorithm, because I could, right, show you in an hour, half an hour even, how to make a convolutional neural network in Python that could have you have like 98% accurate results in discriminating between cats and dogs. Like, I can do that and show you it, but when it goes wrong, you will have no idea what it means. So I mean, learning the basics first, and please build on those foundations.
It's so true. Like, I used a neural network or like an architecture that I don't really understand, and that's partially the reason why it doesn't work, because it doesn't work with the parameters that other people use. So now I'm like, all right, let's go back to the basics. Let's maybe revise some Bayesian statistics just because I already forgot about it, you know. So often you read about posterior and a priori and so on, and you think like, well, I know this, right? But then you think about it, I actually kind of forgot what this really means. So sometimes it's really good to just go back to the super basics, and there's no shame in that, because you will ultimately forget about things even though you kind of use them every day. But I do think I have to go now, so
don't worry, I was literally about to wrap up. That was the last question, so I'm going to wrap it up there. So okay, right, thank you everyone for coming. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you've learned more about PhD than any website will tell you, because I know I have. I reckon almost no undergrads know what a PhD actually is. We just see random people in the corridor who drink like 10 cups of coffee a day and stay until like 12 at night sometimes. You know, that's all we, yep, there you go. So now you should know what the hell is going on the 3rd and 4th floors. Brilliant. Okay, so thank you to Sebastian, Joe and Beltran. It's been lovely having you. I guess I'll end it there. Yeah, I love the shirt as well. And I think Beltran's glasses are great.
Actually, Joe, when I worked at the model train company, one of my co-workers did his PhD at the CERN. So if you're interested in model trains,
there we go.
There's a gig here for you.
Amazing.
He did the communication between the trains and through the rails, which was like super, and he did it in assembler, I think. It was like super complicated.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, I mean, it was in his 50s.
That's mad.
Yeah, but it's just kind of crazy that he went from the CERN to that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Anyway, brilliant. If you want to add any of these people on LinkedIn or whatever, they might be happy, they might not. Just message them on
add
LinkedIn.
me. If I don't like you, I won't accept.
Lovely stuff.
No, of course, add me on LinkedIn.
We'll leave it there. Thank you. Next week we have a talk with Chris White on the double copy theory of gravity, which is my project, so I'm super hyped. How do you mute the chat? Oh, whatever. Okay, I'll see you next week. Bye. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
See you, everyone. Have a nice week.
See you. Thank you for coming. Love Chris White.
He's a legend.
He was my supervisor, actually, for my master's.